Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Tuesday, February 25th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the 2028 presidential election as JD Vance and Kamala Harris are potentially set to be their respective parties' next nominees in the upcoming election cycle. The 2028 election, which is a very long ways away, has already started making headlines as JD Vance becomes the overwhelming favorite in consistent Republican polls and in a CPAC straw poll that is often a good indicator of who's going to be, at least in some capacities, a frontrunner in the next Republican presidential primary. And two, for the Democrats, we see consistent leads for Kamala Harris amongst the national electorate when it comes down to the Democratic primary. On the Democratic side, you'll find that Kamala Harris rarely ever falls below 30% in terms of national support, and after the 2024 election, never once dropped lower than 35%, to which the next place candidate, very often Pete Buttigieg, was at just 12%. That's right, Kamala Harris and JD Vance lead their respective party nominations by massive amounts, double digits on both sides, and JD Vance, like I said, becoming the clear favorite at CPAC certainly means something, at least for the insiders that are closest to the action. Now, looking at the next election, there's a lot that has to go right for JD Vance to become the next president of the United States. And equally said, there has to be a lot that goes right for Kamala Harris to become the next president of the United States. But it looks as if we are back to where we were in 2021, where we had a general indication that the party had not yet moved on from Donald Trump's dominance on the Republican side, and that at the time, it was likely Biden was going to run for re-election, and in this case, it seems ever more likely that Kamala Harris herself is looking to run for re-election. And that's why we're in this limbo, where it looks like not many Democrats are actively scheming because Kamala Harris maintains this national advantage. A very recent poll, one that I thought was interesting, came from McConnell and Associates that shows Kamala Harris with 38% support nationwide amongst Democratic voters. And the reason why that matters is because it's an uptick from the inauguration numbers 5 days after Donald Trump was sworn in as the president, where she was at just 33%. Granted, Kamala Harris seeing a 3-point gain isn't massive enough to say that she's dominating in the primary, that no one should dare run against her, but it matters that Kamala Harris is pulling forth a significant chunk of the vote this early out. And looking to at some of the data we're seeing on the Republican side, it's a very similar story. JD Vance is at 37%, and the next candidate is Donald Trump Jr. at 17%. Ultimately, JD Vance is scoring a significant portion of the vote share amongst different demographic groups and different, respective Republican caucuses. And I do think, too, CPAC combined does show that JD Vance, at least right now, is the favorite. And so looking ahead to 2028, the battle of the vice presidents, as I would like to put it, would be truly very interesting. Because the aftermath of the 2024 election showed that Donald Trump had a very strong campaign. He won all 7 of the battleground states and trounced the Democrats in key, quote-unquote, swing states, at least were swing states in 2020, that were no longer in 2024. States like Texas, which was 5.6% in 2020, this time around was a whopping 14-point margin. States like Florida, that was a 3-point margin in 2020, that this time around was a whopping 13-point margin. And even in states the Democrats had hoped to make marginal gains in, but not necessarily win, North Carolina, Donald Trump won the state by 3 points, reminiscent of his 2016 election victory. And of course, the most damning of them all for the Democratic Party nationwide was Donald Trump's popular vote victory, where he received a plurality of the vote with 77 million votes cast to his name. But to Kamala Harris's credit, she brought back the Democratic Party from what was likely going to be devastating in terms of a presidential election result. Kamala Harris was able to win certain states that I'm not confident that President Biden would have been able to win. And although some of the states absolutely narrowed down, and we can debate and deliberate the way at which the campaigns were run on the Democratic side, there is one thing that I do think can be largely universally agreed upon, is that Kamala Harris likely did as well as Biden could have done in this election, but was likely not going to do better than her. She did the best, I think, in comparison to Biden from what he was able to reach at his maximum, which was 226. And so I think Kamala Harris, even then, too, bringing back the Democrats from what was likely going to be losses in Virginia and Minnesota and New Hampshire matters. And I think that's the big reason why Democrats look at her and say, okay, maybe you can win the next election. But I don't even find that to be the most convincing argument as to why, in theory, in a Kamala Harris-JD Vance matchup, that Kamala Harris could win. I do believe there was absolutely a level of political talent that was tapped into from July 21st onward that was able to take Kamala Harris's approval rating from being in the lowest point a week before Biden dropped out. I kid you not. We covered this on the channel. The lowest point before Biden dropped out of the race. A week later, Kamala Harris enters into the race. 3 months later, her approval rating is nearly as high as it was during the honeymoon period. Kamala Harris was approved of net nationwide for the first time in over 3 years. That is massive. That is a huge thing for Harris. She raises $1.5 billion, so clearly there's an argument to be made there. What I think is the most compelling is that J.D. Vance might not be the best candidate situated to win the general election. When I think about J.D. Vance as a candidate, I think back to the 2020 election. You might be wondering, why do I think about that? Well, I think about Ohio. I think about a state that Donald Trump and Joe Biden spent tens of millions of dollars in, only for the state to shift by less than a point towards the left from 2016. Not many shifts across the state. You can see a lot of the urban areas shifting towards the left, a lot of the rural areas counteracting it. Donald Trump still won the state by 8.1%. But it was this 8.1% victory that was seen by some, given that Trump had lost Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and Arizona, not so good for Donald Trump given what we had seen. After all, Ohio should have been, if he was to win the election, probably would have been an 11 or 12 point margin. But what tipped me off to telling that Ohio was no longer a swing state was that despite the national shift, 3 points to the left, and in the swing states, sometimes more massive shifts, Arizona, Georgia, 4 to 5 to 6 point shifts, Ohio didn't shift, which meant there were voters there that had shifted towards Trump. They were counteracting that national shift. Then 2 years later, J.D. Vance runs for Senate. And yet somehow, in a national environment that Biden won the popular vote by 5, Republicans won this popular vote by 3, in a national environment where the popular vote had swung 8 points to the right from the 2020 election, even more than the swing from 2020 to 2024, J.D. Vance only wins Ohio by 6 points. Why? Because the same vulnerabilities that were utilized by the Democrats in this cycle to make J.D. Vance more unpopular than Trump, and that's still true today. It is very rare, might I say, that you are more unpopular than Trump. Given so much that has been said about Trump, J.D. Vance really tanked a lot, and I honestly do not believe was the strongest for the ticket. I think Trump would have fared better with Marco Rubio. I think Trump would have fared better with Doug Burgum. I even think that he would have done better with Tim Scott. But J.D. Vance, I think, was, not the best choice for the Republican nomination. And just because you win the election doesn't mean that everything went right. There were ways for Trump to have maximized this victory even more. I think had he not done that first debate, he would have done marginally better. I think had he chosen someone different than J.D. Vance, he would have done marginally better. I think had Donald Trump not done the things he did in an RNC speech and going an hour over the teleprompter, he would have done marginally better. There are things that on the margins can make a difference and can sway the electorate by just a little bit. But it is Ohio that I look at to see that Donald Trump, despite having a significantly worse national environment, was able to do this much better than him. Was able to, 2 years later, take the state and win it by roughly 11 points. And I honestly do not give any credit to J.D. Vance for locking this down. In fact, with J.D. Vance on the ticket, Ohio swung 3 points less than the rest of the nation to the right. 3 points less than the average swing towards Donald Trump. If anything, J.D. Vance was a liability. So, that, I think, in its own right, can be a compelling case that if there is, in fact, a matchup of J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris, that maybe Kamala Harris could win it. Looking at my map that I released maybe a month ago, I'm not super confident that that would be the immediately obvious outcome. I think we deal with a lot of the same states. I'm honestly not going to fill it out because I think we should just be talking about the swing states here. We're sure. I could see Kamala Harris, especially given that J.D. Vance doesn't seem to be doing too hot in his own home state of Ohio. Plus, the factors that mattered to a lot of these on-the-margins voters were voters that voted for Trump, that voted for Tim Ryan. And the big reason why they did that is because a lot of them are, blue-collar workers that felt that J.D. Vance was taking advantage and co-opting, their experiences, doing all of these different things. And I'm not saying that I agree or disagree. What I'm telling you is how these things were received. Tim Ryan painted out J.D. Vance to be extreme. Too much even for Ohio. And I say, even for Ohio because it's a red state. Undoubtedly, a double-digit Trump state is a red state, right? Same thing as Colorado, that's a blue state. These are states, Harris won by double digits, Trump won by double digits. But J.D. Vance couldn't crack those double digits. He only won by 6 points in 2022, and I think that matters. His approval rating wasn't hot, right? He wasn't doing too well nationwide either, significantly worse than Harris and Walz and even Trump. And so when I think about the Midwestern states, maybe there's an argument to be made that Kamala Harris could barely win these states. J.D. Vance might win Arizona. I mean, it's a pretty baked-in state now for the Republicans. They won it by 6. But still, there's a pathway forward for Harris to win. But there's equally and a more probable pathway for J.D. Vance to win as of right now. Because Trump is still in a bit of this honeymoon period. It's not perfect, but it is something. There's a possibility that J.D. Vance wins the election as well. And I think it's a higher chance than Harris winning the election. Hold it today. Call it now. But a lot can change, like I said, over the next 3 years. And a lot has to go right for both of these candidates to win their respective party nominations. But it's possible, and it's a lot likelier than we think. Kamala Harris clearly has not lost support amongst the Democratic base in the way that other Democrats who are hoping to run against her could have hoped for. A reason why I showed you that 2016 Democratic primary polling data is because of the fact that it does feel a little bit reminiscent of when Hillary Clinton was discussing the possibility of running in 2013. Granted, there were no big names who wanted to challenge her. Joe Biden was up there, but even then he was polling at 10, 12% across. She's not doing, or Kamala Harris is not doing as well as Hillary Clinton, given that Hillary Clinton, had not lost a general election before. But there is absolutely still an appetite and absolutely still energy for Kamala Harris in this election. And I think that really does matter for the Democratic Party as to who they are driving towards. Kamala Harris has maintained her national presence. She has gone out and won these awards from the NAACP, doing a very coded speech that feels very reminiscent of when she was on the campaign trail in Pittsburgh or Detroit or wherever it might be. Feels very similar. J.D. Vance, in the way that he's positioning himself, taking over the TikTok ban and trying to do whatever he can to build out name ID, also seems to be well positioning himself to run for the presidency of the United States. Both J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris seem to be in a unique position that should they decide to run in their party primaries, today they are the favorites, and that might not change over the next 3 years. But remember back in 2013, the Republican primary polls looked a lot different. And that's the caution I'd give to both of these candidates. That although it very much seemed that Donald Trump was baked in and going to happen inevitably, in 2012 and 2013, nobody could have seen it coming. Chris Christie was the favorite. At periods of time, Scott Walker was the favorite. Rand Paul was the favorite, even up till 2015. Donald Trump never started leading in the polls until around the middle of the election season. Earlier on, when Trump had been in the race, there were times where Trump was losing the head-to-head polls. There were times where Trump, when he started out and decided that he wanted to run, was not polling too well. We can see here Donald Trump entering into the race, if we can get onto it correctly, 1%, 2%, 4%, 3%. He wasn't doing super great. There were other frontrunners. Jeb Bush, Ben Carson, remember that? Scott Walker. Even Mitt Romney was doing well. But then, in 2016, Donald Trump took it away. There could be a sleeper candidate like that for the Democrats. 2 years of being a frontrunner, Christie, Scott Walker, Marco Rubio, all of them, throw it out the window. Donald Trump wants it, and he has it. Wins the election, too. Same could happen in 2028 to either Kamala Harris or J.D. Vance. But time will tell who decides to run. I have a sneaking suspicion that almost everybody listed here is going to run. I don't think Warren will, and I don't think Tim Walz will, but we could see it from Pete. We could see it from Gavin. We could see it from Josh. We could see it from Gretchen. We could see it from all these people. If Kamala wants to run, they might say, so do I. Same thing with J.D. Vance. He's by no means the guaranteed successor. Donald Trump himself said no, he doesn't see J.D. Vance as the 2028 Republican nominee. And that in its own right probably has its own implications. But I can guarantee you too, should Vivek Ramaswamy win the governorship of Ohio, he's going to run. Should Ron DeSantis maintain his popularity in Florida, he's going to run. Donald Trump Jr. has it practically in the bag just by the nature of his name. Him and Eric just had an unfortunate difference in the fact that one was named Donald Trump Jr. and the other named Eric Trump. Either way, though, J.D. Vance still is able to seemingly clear this field right now. So I'm interested. I am so intensely interested as to what is going to happen over this upcoming election cycle. Because from what I can tell you is that I do think we are in for a repeat election in the way that Harris versus Trump was a repeat of Biden versus Trump, except this time it's Harris versus Vance. And it would be a very, very long combination of factors of the same types of candidates running against each other. The Trump wing of the Republican Party and the Biden centrist, more, middle of the road wing of the Democratic Party. And it'll be interesting to see how they position themselves, how they campaign against each other, and what it would look like through the primary process, given that all of them, J.D. Vance and Kamala Harris, will be running with contested races. They do not have this on lock in the way they are going to scare everybody out of the race. But I do think there's a strong chance that they get into it with everybody else and still prevail and come out on top and face each other in the November 2028 general election, because a lot of this genuinely begins now and the discussions have already started heating up. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2026 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.